Hi, Doug Smith with another Restaurant Mastermind. I have spoken with several people inside of the restaurant industry itself. Today, I want to take a little bit of a different angle and talk with someone who's really in the trenches about the restaurant industry as a whole. Danny Klein. Danny's the director of digital content at Food News Media, QSR magazine, and FSR magazine. And Danny, the reason that I reached out is you've put up a lot of great content on LinkedIn recently with your insights to the industry. So I wanted to have a chance to just talk to you to kind of help spread the word and the work that you're doing because you're hearing it from all angles. And my first question has to be, what's been your biggest takeaway so far regarding the virus and its effect on the industry? Because as I said, you've seen it from all angles.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, but I don't know if I'm a mastermind, but I will take the moniker for now. Just generally speaking, it's a wide-ranging, kind of daily changing thought process. But for me personally, just the last week and a half really kind of started with a phone call that I received from a restaurateur, and it's just sent me down a lot of rabbit holes, which is really talking about the CARES Act and the stimulus package and how that's changing, evolving, how it affects restaurants, really the many, many problems with it. It's just one of those things that, I'm not a legal expert. I don't have a background in government relations or anything like that. I used to write about high school football for over a decade in Florida. So when I first started to dive in, the language is just all over the place. But the more and more I talk to people about it, the more I hear about it and read about it. It's just been a very disheartening, set of events. Because one of the things, and this is something I've talked to a lot of people about, is that since really day one, restaurants have been kind of the brunt of the negativity or sort of the action of what's been happening, and it's understandable to an extent, just because obviously with social distancing, you're really stripping out the essential element of a restaurant. People going to dine in, the gathering part of it, just the social nature of eating essentially, and a lot of people, as some studies I've read have shown, it's sort of switching now to a lot of us are just kind of eating to survive. We're cleaning out the pantry or we're grabbing whatever we can find, so that, experience-based part of it is kind of gone. And of course, that's, where restaurants have always lived, is in not just providing food, but also giving you an experience for a really affordable price point. So anyway, with that said, one of the very early things, the messaging out there, don't eat at restaurants, was kind of what was said in those early, COVID-19, conferences. And so that has just kind of snowballed, over time, where, a lot of reports of service, and you ask people, do you want to eat at a restaurant? Do you consider it safe? And everybody is pretty much on the bandwagon that it's not. And I'm not necessarily saying that it is. It just feels like from that very early point that restaurants were a punching bag in a lot of the talks about what we could and could not do during this process. And that's just been a very kind of difficult thing. But the part about that, kind of going back to the stimulus package, is that while that is, in my opinion, something you can't argue, if you just go back to what officials said and how they said it, the actual stimulus package, and we focus mostly on the PPP part of it, or the paycheck protection, was not written seemingly at all with restaurateurs in mind. The National Restaurant Association today just released something that I wrote about, where they kind of set up a bunch of bullet points of things that are wrong. And if you go top down on that, you just kind of start asking yourselves, who were they thinking of exactly when they wrote this? Because there's really two main problems, and that's the loan forgiveness is really based on, whether or not you keep your staff, you don't pay them less, or you have the ability to rehire them. And if you talk to anybody who works in the restaurant industry, those are things that, are sort of, they're things that sound better on paper than they are really fitting into actual logic. Um, because one of the things is just, there's this provision in there that 75% of the loan has to go to payroll for you to have it forgiven. And so that leaves you with only 25% to cover other expenses during this crazy time, including, rent and utilities and whatever other, major problems you have. And in a lot of restaurateurs' case, that's mostly a rent concern, especially in markets like New York. So to think you can only have 25% of that loan to stay afloat for 2 months is just a very sad detail in there. It almost pulls the rug out from thousands of restaurants, really. Another part, too, is that saying you're going to put 75% toward a payroll for a staff that you don't have jobs for anymore. If you're going to take out and delivery only, especially if, say, you're a big full service restaurant, where did all those employees go? So are you just now keeping them on staff, paying them, that money that you have so that you can get the grant relieved? Or, what exactly are you are you doing? And if you do that, then those same employees can't go to unemployment, where generally speaking, they can make far more money now with the way that it's set up, because restaurants are, typically a pretty low wage business. So you have, as one person put it to me, you're essentially holding them hostage so that you can get a grant, forgiven by the government. So if you just think of that alone, that almost sounds, I don't know how to put it into words, but there's something very wrong there.
Right.
And then the other part too, so the rehiring part, the amount of time that they're giving you to do so is also essentially unrealistic, because a lot of restaurants, we have no idea when they're going to be able to reopen. And if they do reopen, are they going to have reduced staffing levels? Will there be reduced sales? Will there be fewer tables in the restaurant so that they can make, guests feel more comfortable? There's just so many different parts and elements to this that weren't tailored toward the industry that was on the front lines, kind of struck the hardest, at least in my view. I know, again, I'm biased with that, but I would be hard pressed to find a similar industry that took as much, of a blow from all the social distancing and just the mandates and the closed dining rooms and what have you than restaurants did. So I just wish those things aligned a little better, and maybe there's time for that to change and some amendments to be made, or more relief is being talked about now or being requested. But the sad point of that is that it's going to be too late for a lot of people, because then even if they do approve it, you've still got to apply for it, which I've talked to people. A lot of people say it's a mess. They're getting obviously millions and millions of requests. So trying to get in there, get approved, get, your documents in order. As someone told me the other day, this is something that's easier for a lot of chains than it is for us, because we don't have a CFO. We don't have a lawyer on staff. I don't have money to pay a lawyer, to take a look at this. And the other thing too is, you talk about, grants and the time it might come to show up, and whether or not you want to take that gamble and keep people on staff. Do you have 3 weeks to do that and hope the money comes in? And for a lot of people, the answer is no. So yeah, that's the thing that's jumped out to me the most. I've been trying to cipher through it, because again, it's like reading another language to me. But I've talked to a lot of people, conversations that have gone on for hours, and we're just trying together to really kind of understand how to get the help that restaurants need. And right now it just looks like it's hard to get, or it's not there, or not enough of it is there. So I'm trying to champion that cause to the best that I can, but it's not easy because there's so much noise out there right now. From media and a lot of restaurants that I've talked to, one thing they say a lot is that it really seems like the consumer facing media, we wish they would talk a little bit more about how restaurants are safer to get takeout than grocery stores. That's something I've heard a lot. Why hasn't that been said? Why haven't more publications written about the fact that most restaurateurs can't get this money, or it's tailored in a way to basically force them to do things that would either sink them, or they'd be stuck with a loan when this is all over, that they have no chance of actually paying. So they're either forced to say, I'm going to gamble and try to make it, or I'm going to have a loan and we'll see what happens when I don't get it forgiven. Because we might be sitting here in late June, or who knows when, with thousands and thousands of restaurants with loans that for one reason or the other were not forgiven, and yet they have maybe half the amount of dine-in sales they had even with things reopening, not to mention the 2 months, 3 months that they spent not operating, and yet they're going to try to pay these loans. So I talked to an attorney who said that bankruptcies are probably going to spike within a month or 2 months. One of my colleagues chatted with someone specifically about this, and that's probably very true, unfortunately, because restaurateurs are in a desperate scenario where they're saying, well, I don't understand the loan program, but I got to take the loan, because if I don't take the loan, I'm going to shut down for good. And, I got to try any lifeline I can. And we'll be sitting here, like I said, with loans that are not grants anymore. They're legitimate low interest loans that the restaurateur cannot afford. So yeah, I've been a little bit disheartened by some of it. But at the same time, there's been a lot of messages of hope, and great innovation and all those kind of awesome things, philanthropy, feeding hospitality workers, restaurants stepping up and doing things for their employees that they didn't do before, which I hope carry on, past the crisis, and things like that are all great. But, we're really at kind of the peak level of things. I know it's sort of flattened out a little bit compared to last week in terms of sales plummets, but still sort of stuck in that mode of this is just devastating on a wide scale. So we're trying to do everything we can from our perspective to talk to people and to get their feedback, and to offer as much insight and advice as we can. I mean, I know that it's always going to be a small drop in the bucket, but that's pretty much the only direction I can move right now is forwards. So trying to stay busy doing that. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, the main thing right now that's on my mind that I think about at night when I'm sleeping is stimulus package details, which is kind of a strange, sad reality, but that's where I am today. So.
Well, I would encourage anyone watching this to, if they're connected with you on LinkedIn, go through some of your recent posts. If they're not, they should connect with you, because you really wrote a good article about the CARES Act, talking about how it may not actually help restaurants right away on the stimulus part of it, meaning the regular person getting your $1,200, $2,400 check, where that may go towards other things. It's not necessarily going to help stimulate the restaurants per se. And that was a really good article, but that also leads into the other one, talking about how you wrote an article talking about how restaurants will help us return to normalcy. And I think that's an important vision right now. I've spoken with several different CEOs, COOs of some pretty big restaurants. They're all talking about, we know this is going to end, and we have to get through this, but we also have to have long-term planning. So, if you would, I mean, briefly mention what are what was the basis of that article, talking about how restaurants will help us return to normalcy when this ends, because it will end sometime, we just don't know when.
Right. Yeah. So, and it wasn't that's one of my favorite articles to write recently. It's like you said, it was like a glimmer of hope in a dark room. But yeah, I mean, basically, so it was information from Data Central. They've been doing these reports multiple times a week where they poll 1,000 consumers. So the idea is that they were asking people, when you do reemerge into society, where is one place you would go? And the number one thing they said was, I really miss going to dine in restaurants. Um, so I think that that's inherently true. And as you mentioned, thinking forward, a lot of restaurateurs and people that I've chatted with, they say that they want to just make sure they're ready when that time comes, because there's no question that people are going to want to get back out. And similar to the Great Recession, I'm trying to make this point is that restaurants, just generally speaking, and this has been going on for decades, is that they're a pretty affordable outlet for people who are actually watching their budgets, who also want, a night out or an experience. You saw this happen a lot, in 2008, where people were cutting back on things like family vacations and all that kind of stuff, but they were still going to restaurants because, for a family of four, you get a few hours. It's, a much more affordable, concept. So I think that's going to be there without question. Now, I just talked to somebody yesterday about this. There's definitely, it's not going to be most likely, you're just going to, mandate's going to say you can go back to restaurants and the floodgates are just going to open. Unless there's a vaccine or a treatment that's readily available, that's probably not going to happen, strictly for the perspective that a lot of people are still going to be very wary of dining out, and restaurants are going to have to be ready to embrace that. So this, guy that I spoke to yesterday is from Beef O'Brady's CEO. They said that they'll probably, when they reopen, they'll have limited tables, which was kind of a popular thing to do in the early days of all of this before, the full mandates came down. So they'll do things like that, or, still have, servers wearing gloves and masks, perhaps, things like that will be very important as people kind of slowly build their way up to dining at restaurants more. So I think that's probably the most likely scenario, is that we'll have this kind of slow burn back to normal where, maybe for a few weeks or months. I mean, again, it's hard to predict timing with any of this, but there will probably be a consumer base of people on a very broad scale who are still a little bit uncertain about dining out. Because going back to the earlier point, I mean, that's really branded in people's minds at this point, that dining at restaurants is dangerous. I mean, every study you've seen has shown that. I mean, it's just what people think, right or wrong. That's how it is. So I think it'll be on the restaurants to be very strategic and smart about, understanding that they need to slowly and methodically reopen to guests, and to continue to cater, to their fears and try to do everything they can to ease them. I mean, one great thing, I saw a couple days ago was Chick-fil-A is doing this thing where they're putting, hand washing stations in the drive-through lane, so that when you're in your car, you could literally watch them wash their hands,
Right.
before they give you your food or after they give it to somebody else. And while that sounds, really sort of basic and simple, the truth is that's the type of thing that's going to go a really long way to helping customers, basically put restaurants back into their normal routines. But, generally speaking, I do think that when we climb this massive hurdle, the restaurants that do make it through are going to be in great position, because people are going to want to go back out and socialize with their friends, and what's always the way that most people do that, so you haven't seen your, I don't know, college roommate for a while, and you call them up and say, let's grab dinner, right? I mean, that almost seems like the type of thing that we didn't really think twice about before. But just imagine what a boon that's going to provide to the restaurants that haven't had that for whatever the period of time has been. And that's going to only be accentuated because people are going to want to reconnect, spouses, with family members they can't see, and they're going to use restaurants to get there. So we have to hold that nugget of hope because it is a thing. And everyone that I chat with always talks about, let's just make it through. And then once you make it through, there's arguments to be made that you might even be in better shape than you were before. Just because the demand is going to be really high, and the competition is going to look different. And perhaps also, you may have more takeout and delivery business than you had before, because now that's ingrained in some of your consumers, behavior. We just don't know about all of that, but the one thing we do know is that people are going to want to dine out again. So I urge anyone who is listening to start thinking that way already, because you're going to have to do certain things to make that a seamless process. You can't just expect to turn the lights back on and everything to be like it was, because it's not going to be. People are going to be different. Consumers are going to look at servers differently. They're going to, if you have an open kitchen, you better believe they'll be looking in there.
Good point.
If you deliver any of those sort of things, there's really no point for you to stop the sanitary measures that you've implemented and accelerated the cleaning protocols. All those things, they need to stay in place, for sure, the foreseeable future. But if you've built that into your operating procedures now, I don't know why you would let it go. But I just think people need to remember, a lot. And I think I saw something from the National Restaurant Association today, that a lot of those restaurants, they're going to be like startups suddenly. So you're gonna have to order all the food again and do all these things that are not easy out of the gates. So I've seen things like maybe they could come up with some kind of fund that is for restaurants to reopen. I think that would be very helpful, because it's not a cheap process. But just from a theoretical, non-financial one, I would just urge people to continue to keep their pulse on consumers. If the date is June, as a lot of people hope it is, just keep in mind all these things, because there will still be a lot of fear out there. That's just, and it's up to restaurants to ease that. It's not gonna take care of itself.
Good insight. Danny Klein, Director of Digital Content at Food News Media, QSR Magazine, FSR Magazine. And I certainly want to stay in contact with you, Danny, because as I said at the very beginning, you're in the trenches. You talk with a lot of restaurant people. My company, we work with restaurants around the world. So obviously, we both really want and need restaurants to succeed and stay open, because they're our livelihood as well. And when you have these conversations with these owners and these stories, and you really see how this is affecting business and all the lives that are like a domino, no one has the answer, and things change all the time. It seems like day to day, as you said. So that's why I encourage people to follow you, connect with you, read your information, because it's really good. It's
I appreciate that.
putting the facts out there. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you to say, let's get more insight from this guy. So thank you again for your time. I certainly appreciate it. And if you want to plug, is there any specific websites? Can people just connect with you on LinkedIn? How do they follow you?
Well, to your first point, from the fact there's a bed in the background, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Yeah, I go to QSRmagazine.com or FSRmagazine.com. One is for full service restaurants, the other's for quick service, naturally. So both websites, we've been updating daily. We have kind of landing pages that are right there on the front that we collect all the different links. I believe we're close to 200 at the point right now of stories in the past 3 weeks. I haven't counted, but it's a lot. um, so yeah, you can reach out through there, shoot me an email. It's just Danny at foodnewsmedia.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to stay active on there. Always really good insight from people, commenting and what have you. So the line is open. Just don't call my office. I have not been there in a while. But any other way you want to reach me, definitely feel free to. I'm
Cool.
happy to talk right now.
Appreciate it. Danny, I'll certainly be in contact with you as this thing rolls on. Thank you for your insight and the information and content that you're putting out. And thank you for the opportunity to chat with you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks.